Hi everybody and welcome to the second video in a series of videos exploring labour markets. Now hopefully what you remember is in the previous video we were looking at the demand for labour. So the idea that the demand for labour is a derived demand from the demand for the goods and services produced. We looked at when we met the assumption of ceteris paribus, when we change wage rates, how it will create contractions and extensions in the demand for labour. We did some work on wage elasticity of demand, and then we also looked at what would make a demand for labour curve shift outwards and inwards. In other words, non-wage reasons why the demand for labour might increase and decrease. Now in this video, what we're going to be looking at is the supply of labour. Now you've got to remember that when it comes to labour markets, it's us as individuals who supply our labour. So when you go to work, you're doing so to generate an income, a wage. Okay, so the logic would be, everyone, we're going to have a positive relationship between wage rates and the quantity of labour. The logic would be if wage rates were to grow, then more of us will become more willing and able to supply our labour. So look at the diagram. If we start off at W1, Q1, then what this shows is that the wage rate 1, Q1 of us are willing and able to supply our labour. But as wage rates grow from W1 to W2, more of us will become willing and able to supply our labour. So we're going to get an extension in the supply of labour. Now, as wage rates fall, let's say from W1 to W3, then less of us become willing and able to supply our labour. Now, the reason for this, everyone, for these extensions and contractions, again, when we draw this supply of labour curve, we're making the assumption of ceteris paribus. The only thing that we're changing is the wage rate. Now, the reason why we're going to create these extensions and contractions, though, is partly because of the opportunity cost of supplying your labour. So think about it logically. By going to work, you are sacrificing leisure time. So that could be time spent in front of your computer, time watching Netflix, going out on your bike, or whatever you choose to do in your free time, less time with friends and family, etc. So the logic would be that when you supply your labour, you've got to be adequately compensated for that loss of leisure time. So what we would say is as wage rates grow, then we're going to get an extension in supply because the opportunity cost of not working have increased. So by sitting home doing nothing or spending time with friends and family, enjoying your leisure time, you are sacrificing a higher wage rate. So more of us will become willing and able to give up that leisure time to go and get a job. But as wage rates fall, let's say from W1 to W3, the supply of labour will contract because the opportunity cost of not working has fallen. So by staying at home, you're now sacrificing a smaller wage rate than what you were previously. So more of us would value the leisure time over that now lower wage rate across the economy. So guys, we've got here a positive relationship between the supply of labour and wage rates. What we're going to be looking at on this slide is the wage elasticity of supply. Now again, when we looked at 1.2, we looked at price elasticity of supply. And hopefully what you remember is the definition was the responsiveness of supply to a change in prices. Now when we look at wage elasticity of supply, it's more or less exactly the same concept. We're looking this time at the responsiveness of the supply of labour to a change in wage rates. In other words, as wage rates change, how much will our supply of labour extend and contract? So we've got this formula to help us out. So the percentage change in the supply of labour divided by the percentage change in wage rates. Now, of course, we can have, again, wage unitary supply of labour curves, which is a bit like this diagram that I drew earlier on, but we're going to focus here on wage inelastic and wage elastic supply of labour curves. Now, let's think first of all about wage inelastic supply of labour. Now, remember what we're saying here, that the supply of labour is unresponsive to a change in wage rates. So in other words, the percentage change in the wage rate would exceed the percentage change in supply. Now, anything from the formula between 0 and +1 would show us wage inelastic supply. But look at the diagram. The growth in wage rates from W1 to W2 is more significant than that extension in the supply of labour. So the supply of labour is unresponsive to that change in wage rates. On the right-hand side, we've got a wage elastic supply of labour curve. Now, we would say this time the supply of labour is responsive to a change in wage rates. And again, look at the diagram. A small increase in wage rates leads to a really, really big extension in the supply of labour. So from the formula, anything between +1 and +infinity would show us a wage elastic supply of labour curve. Remember, what we're saying here is the percentage change in the supply of labour would exceed that percentage change in wage rates. Right, what we now need to be thinking about then is why. What would make the supply of labour inelastic and what would make it elastic? Now, I think there's a simpler way of thinking about this. Think about what a wage inelastic supply means. It means as wage rates grow, it's very difficult for more of us to supply more labour, or it's difficult for the economy to supply more labour than what's currently being provided. Now, a really, really good reason for this could be that there is in the economy very, very, very low unemployment. Now, think about it logically. If there's very few people who are available, who are free to take up those vacancies as wage rates grow, then as an economy, we're unable to respond to them growing wage rates. In other words, most of us are already supplying our labour. There's a really small pool of people extra that can go and supply their labour. So if the number of people unemployed is low, as wage rates grow, it's difficult for extra people to supply labour because they simply don't exist. So you could think about this one, everyone, as a lack of spare capacity in the economy. So if unemployment is low, then it's going to be a wage inelastic supply. Now, I'm just going to jump to the bottom point quickly. Short term. Now, think about it logically. There could be within a particular job, as wage rates grow, more people might be willing to supply their labour in that industry, but in the short term, people struggle to respond to that growth in wage rates. So people have maybe got to retrain, gain new skills, relocate. So as wage rates grow in the short run, they're unable to respond to those problems that might be creeping into the economy. Now, the next one is something that we call occupational and geographical immobility of labour. Now, think about what the word immobility means. It means that you've got poor mobility. You struggle to move around. There's a lack of flexibility within the economy. Now, occupational immobility is where people lack the skills to move into new jobs in the economy. So think about what this means. If people lack the skills to move into new jobs, then they are unable to supply their labour. They haven't got the skills to be able to work in those industries. So as wage rates grow, they're still unable to supply their labour due to a lack of skills. Now, you tend to find in a country like the UK, we've had a lot of this over the last 30 to 40 years. We've had lots of big traditional industries, so in manufacturing, that have been closing down. And then we've had a big growth in service sector jobs, ICT, retail, marketing, those types of things there. And the people that lose their jobs in the old industries struggle to adapt and gain the skills to work in them new industries. So those people will find it difficult to supply more labour as wage rates grow. Now, geographical immobility of labour. The idea is this time that people are in the wrong place compared to where the jobs are. So as wage rates grow across the economy, people find it difficult to supply their labour due to geographical problems. So what this could be is things such as the jobs are in a different part of the country to where they live. And it could be the cost of relocation is too high. So maybe house prices are too expensive in the area where the job vacancies are. Or it could be the cost of transport to get to them jobs is so expensive, or it's so difficult to travel to that place, then people would be unable and unwilling to take them jobs in other parts across the country. So guys, the idea that when you've got high immobility, again, as wage rates grow, people struggle to respond by supplying more labour. Now look at the wage elastic supply of labour curve. This time, remember, the supply of labour is very responsive to a growth in wage rates. So in other words, as wage rates grow, people find it really, really easily to supply more labour. Now this could be due to high unemployment. If you've got lots of people unemployed across the economy, as wage rates grow, you've got a big pool of people that can supply the labour in these vacancies. We've got lots of spare capacity. This could also be driven by low immobility of labour. So if people have got lots of really, really good transferable skills, as wage rates grow, they can easily supply their labour into different jobs that might be taking place across the economy. Now, it could also be very good geographical mobility. So if people are easily able to relocate for jobs or commute bigger distances for jobs, then again, as wage rates grow, they'll have no problem supplying extra labour. And of course, it could be in the long term. If we move towards the long term, we're giving people more time to respond to growing wage rates by gaining new skills, relocating to where the jobs are. And again, that would make the supply of labour now very wage elastic. Okay, now the last thing that I want to do with you in this video is to think about shifts in the supply of labour. Now, what we're doing here then, and I'll write this down, we're looking here at non-wage reasons. So the reasons why the supply of labour might change for non-wage reasons. Now think about what we've done. In the last slides, we focused on contractions and extensions in the supply of labour. In other words, when you change the wage rate, how much would it affect the supply of labour? What we're looking at now, and I'll show you this through the first diagram, is this. So in this first diagram, when wage rates are held constant at W1, we've now got Q2 people willing and able to supply their labour, when previously it was only Q1. In the right-hand side diagram, again, we've held the wage rate constant, but this time we've got less people willing and able to supply their labour. So with the same wage rate, fewer people are now willing and able to work in the economy. So let's think about what would make the supply of labour shift outwards, first of all. So we're now thinking about this first diagram then. And again, look at the diagram. At the same wage rate, we've now got more people willing and able to work in the economy. Now, some of the reasons for this could be a growth in the working age population. So if we've got more people of working age, then well, we've got a bigger supply of people willing and able to work in the economy. That could be driven by a reduction in the school leaving age. So if you allow people to leave school at a lower age, then you've got more younger people willing and able to work in the economy. It could be that we increase the retirement age. So by raising it from, say, 66 to 70, would mean you've now got more older people supplying their labour within the economy. Now, it could also be driven by, and this is kind of building on the same idea, positive net migration. So if we have more people moving into the UK from overseas, it would increase our population level, and you've got more people willing and able to supply their labour. Now, the next one is a reduction in the costs of working. Now, think about what this means. When you go to work, you generate an income, that's your wage. But you don't get all of that money. You've got certain things that you've got to pay for in order to earn that wage. So, for example, you might have commuting costs. So you might have to travel in your car there and back each day. But that's petrol costs, extra wear and tear on your car. It could be that you travel by public transport, so bus tickets, train tickets, etc. Well, those are all costs that you've got to pay for to supply your labour. Now, it could even be, though, things like training and education costs. So maybe to enter a particular profession, you've got to get a degree or a particular qualification to work in that industry. Well, if those costs were to fall, then again, more people become willing and able to supply their labour. Other reductions in costs of working, there could be childcare. So by going to work, you might have to put your kids into childcare or breakfast clubs, after school clubs. Again, those are costs that you've got to pay for. And the logic would be that when you earn your wage, you've got to deduct all these costs to work out the benefits of going into that job. Well, if these costs were to fall, so if childcare costs were to become cheaper, training, education costs were to fall in price, transport becomes more affordable, then you get to keep a bigger chunk of your wage. And that again would make more people willing and able to supply their labour. Now, it could even be driven, though, by an increase in the non-monetary benefits of working. So what we're looking here are the non-financial reasons why people go to work. So this could be the working conditions improve. It could be the perks of the job improve, such as more holidays. It could be that there's more chance of promotion in particular jobs. So we're looking here at the non-financial benefits of going to work. If these things improve, then more people are happy to sacrifice their leisure to go and work at a particular wage rate. Now, it could be driven by a reduction in the barriers to get into a particular job. So it could be that, to work in certain industries, you've got to have particular qualifications. Well, if we remove the need for those qualifications, then more people are able to supply their labour. It could be driven, though, by reductions in visas or work permits. So removing these would allow you to work overseas and supply more labour. So if the UK were to remove visas and work permit needs, then more foreign workers come into our economy to supply their labour. Now, this could also, though, be driven by trade unions. Now, remember, a trade union is an organisation set up to represent the interests of workers in a particular profession. Now, trade unions will use what they call collective bargaining. So they will bargain with businesses on behalf of all their members to improve things such as the non-monetary benefits of working in a job. So they might be able to negotiate better working conditions for its members. And if that's the case, again, more people become willing and able to supply their labour in that particular profession. Now, in the diagram on the right-hand side, we've got an inward shift in the supply of labour. So the same wage rate, we've now got fewer people willing and able to work in the economy. So this could be driven by a reduction in the working age population. Clearly, if you've got less people of working age in your economy, you've got a smaller supply of labour willing and able to work at a given wage rate. It could be driven by negative net migration. So if you've got more people emigrating from your economy than immigrating into it, then again, you're going to get a reduction in working age population. I mean, you've got fewer people willing and able to work. It could be driven by an increase in the cost of working. So if transport costs to get to work become more expensive, childcare becomes more expensive, education becomes more expensive, then again, the benefits of going to work would fall because you've got to deduct all these costs away from your incomes. And if that happens, you become less willing and able to work. It could be driven by a reduction in non-monetary benefits. So if working conditions of work were to deteriorate, if the perks of the job were to fall, then again, less people become willing and able to work in these different industries. It could be driven by higher barriers. So it could be that you need more qualifications to working in industry. That would make less people willing and able to work. It could be that we impose more visas, more work permits on people moving into the country. And that would also lead to an inward shift in the supply of labour. Now, trade unions can also reduce the supply of labour. Okay, now trade unions, for example, can organise strikes, and they can almost force people to take away their supply of labour. Then strikes could be to try and negotiate better pay or working conditions. But whilst they're taking workers on strike, they're reducing the supply of labour. Okay, so trade unions can either increase or decrease the supply of labour through their actions. Right, guys, well, hopefully you are now comfortable with the supply of labour. Before I go from this video, what you need to be aware of, though, is that a supply of labour curve is drawn on the assumption of ceteris paribus. The only thing we're changing along the supply curve is a change in wage rates. We can look at how much the supply of labour will change as wage rates change by looking at wage elasticity of supply. But we've also got to be aware we can have non-wage reasons why the supply of labour can either increase or decrease. Right, everyone, thank you very much. I will stop this video there.